Well, good afternoon to Jane and to the great patriots of the Ashville Tea Party meeting in Hendersonville today. Thank you for letting me appear to you via video, although I sure wish I could be there with you in person. I told Jane that when we got this on the calendar, I had it circled and was really looking forward to being with my fellow Tea Party patriots, really more than any other event I've got on the calendar right now. But fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I guess it's fortunate because I'm still employed. It's unfortunate because I'm working two jobs during the day, one being a full-time candidate for the United States Senate, and still the second being a member of the North Carolina State Bar. Once in a blue moon, you get called into court on short notice. It doesn't happen that often. It happened today. And last week we got a notice we had to be in court on Thursday, believe it or not. It might have been Wednesday, but in the middle of the week, and by Friday, the other side said they wanted to continue the matter. So we agreed to that. And I called James, said I was going to make it anyway. And well, then we find out just yesterday that they pulled the continuance off, which is forcing me to be in court in Mecklenburg County. But I can tell you, I would much rather be with all of y'all. I appreciate you and apologize that I cannot be in there in person, but I'm looking forward to getting there to be with you just as soon as possible. Well, as some of you know, I'm running for the United States Senate. Really entered the race in February. I felt like that Senator Tillis needed to be challenged, and I felt like that we needed a MAGA, pro-America first conservative with a track record of supporting President Trump to jump in the race. And that's why we're here. But before I go on and talk more about the Senate race, I want to just say a personal word to all of you, and I want to thank you and encourage you for what you are doing in the grassroots and on the ground. You know, the most powerful words, I think, in the Constitution are the first seven: we, the people of the United States. Our grassroots Tea Party folks are we, the people of the United States. And this race that I'm running for is the U.S. Senate race, and of course, it's constitutionally prescribed, and it is certainly a very significant race and position. But I want you to know that for the Democrats, you know, politics is their religion, and so often I think that we as conservatives, even as constitutionalists, we overlook the importance of getting on the ground in these local races, whether it's school board or you know, city council or mayor or county commission or whatever. This is where the Democrats thrive and push their candidates, and they control so much of local policy and in the General Assembly as well. So we've got to cover our bases in every elected office in our state, our county, and in our nation. And I know that y'all, and I've been on your website, I've seen the great work that you're doing to alert folks about what's happening in the General Assembly and other places. I know that y'all are doing that, so thank you for that. And I want you to stay encouraged, never get discouraged. You know, I speak a lot of times and have spoken over the years, both in my capacity as an author, and you know, some of you know we've had 16 books published. As a matter of fact, we're going to present one book today to the Asheville Tea Party. That is Kangaroo Court, my most recent book. We're going to give that to Jane. Y'all can pass it around. It came out in October. But I've had an opportunity to speak a lot. And sometimes at the end of my talks, folks will come up to me and say, you know, Don, I'm just so discouraged. What can I do? I don't know anybody. And I say, look, it isn't about the numbers. It's the old saying, it's not the quantity, but the quality that counts. And I remind those folks, not far from where I'm making this video right now, in an area of South Charlotte that's called South Park. There used to be a lot of pasture land over there. Now it's malls and it's asphalt and everything. But on that pasture land, there was a kid named Billy Graham that was brought up. And Billy Graham's mom, you know, she had an audience of three: Billy, his brother, Melvin, and his sister. Now tell me that even though Billy's mother didn't have a huge audience of a platform of thousands, that she did not make an eternal difference in this world. So be encouraged. All of us have, you know, family members, spouses, you know, grandchildren, children, cousins. Ask the Lord where your calling is and step in there. It might be an audience of 100,000. It might be an audience of one. It doesn't matter. The power is in prayer, and the power is in sticking with what we believe. Now, this Senate race, I think, as I've been telling many of our audiences, is really the most important United States Senate race in the United States, really in the 21st century. And this is really for two reasons. One, because, of course, the balance of the United States Senate can hang on the outcome of this race. That's number one. And the second reason is, in many ways, who we send to the Senate will send a strong message shot across the bow as to what is going to happen with the MAGA movement going forward after the end of the Trump administration. Because as you know, whoever steps into the now former candidate Tom Tillis's seat is going to be serving under President Trump for the final 2 years of his administration, and then for 4 years, hopefully under President J.D. Vance. If we send a strong America First MAGA candidate to the United States Senate, that will be a powerful shot across the bow that the America First movement is going to live on and live strong and mightily. And therefore, that makes this Senate race very, very important. So the question is, how do we as North Carolinians come to the decision as to who we're going to support? I don't have all the answers, but I think there are a couple of things we can look at. One, I think we can look at track record. One of the reasons I did jump into this race is because Senator Tillis needed to be replaced. There's no question about that, and I'm not going to go into a long litany of the reasons. You all know the reasons. It started with his opposition to immigration reform in the first Trump administration. He supported Mueller. Then coming into the second Trump administration, the straw that broke the camel's back for me was when he tried to pull the nomination of Pete Hegseth, who's a friend of mine, and one thing led another, and I jumped into the race. But what is the candidate's track record? And in this case, my track record has been, for the last 10 years, solid MAGA, pro-Trump. Some of you may know that I have, I'm a military author, an ex-Navy JAG officer, and gotten involved with some rules of engagement issues. We lost a helicopter in Afghanistan in 2011, extortion 17. There were 17 members of SEAL Team 6, which is our most lethal and prestigious military unit, who died on that chopper, along with a total of 30 Americans altogether. The chopper appears to have been flown into a Taliban trap and shot down. I was watching a press conference on YouTube coming from the National Press Club in Washington, and something just told me to send a Facebook message to one of the moms, Karen Vaughn, and some of y'all know Karen, know who she is, who lost their son Aaron. And I did. I wrote her a note and I said, Karen, I'm an ex-Navy JAG officer. I had handled a major aviation disaster as a Navy JAG officer when we lost an F-14. I had at that time written 7 military books. All those were Christian fiction up to that point. And I said, listen, here's my background. If I can help you in any way, let me know. I was really never expecting to hear from her. And she wrote back almost immediately and said, you could be an answer to prayer. We've been praying for somebody to help us figure out what's going on and possibly to write a book. Several weeks later, I drove down from the Charlotte area to Atlanta to meet Billy and Karen. We met there and talked for a couple of hours at a Denny's restaurant. At the end of the 2 hours, Billy was trying to size me up, and he slid across the table a small stick drive. And on that stick drive was 1,250 pages of the military's investigation of that shoot down, which had been strangely declassified within a period of 90 days. We don't know how that happened. Virtually never happens. It's taken over 50 years for the JFK files to be declassified, and the government just doesn't declassify quickly. Somebody wanted the truth out. I took that disc home, the stick home, and reviewed it, and it became clear that our guys have been sacrificed, either by direct plan from the Obama administration or by criminal negligence. Wrote a book on it, got to be close with some of those family members. Later, Salem produced a movie based on my book called Fallen Angel Extortion 17. General Boykin, Sean Hannity got involved with supporting that movie, and it can be viewed now. I'd love to show it to you sometime on the Salem Network. But through all that work, I met a young man by the name of Pete Hegseth, who y'all know and is now our Secretary of Defense. Pete and I began working on rules of engagement issues together there during that period of time. Obama had been in office and had set the rules of engagement basically to favor the Taliban over Americans. And so our guys were having to be shot at before they could shoot back. And if you shot first, you got prosecuted. Around 2019, Pete had gone from Concerned Veterans of America, CVA, to Fox News, and we stayed in touch. And about that time, 2 American service members were arrested by the military on charges of quote unquote murder. One was a Navy SEAL named Eddie Gallagher, who was friends with Aaron Vaughn, who died in extortion 17. The other was a Green Beret officer named Major Matt Goldstein, both charged with murder for killing the enemy. Pete Hegseth came to me about that time and remembered a third young man, Lieutenant Clint Lawrence, who was an 82nd Airborne paratrooper who had been charged with murder in 2012 and convicted in 2013 when his men had gotten into a firefight in Afghanistan in Kandahar province. This motorcycle had approached the front of their position, and the platoon that Clint was commanding was a single line platoon. And up at the front of the platoon, there were Afghan soldiers, supposedly our allies. This motorcycle comes in toward the front of the platoon. Clint can't even see them because he's a quarter of a mile back in one of these great berms. The Afghans start shooting at the motorcycle. Our guys at the front of the platoon radio the lieutenant. They said, "Lieutenant, request permission to fire." Lawrence says permission granted. And so there were two of the three riders who were killed. Their bodies were taken off. We don't know to this day whether it was American or Afghan bullets that killed them because the bodies weren't recovered and the bullets weren't recovered. Well, the Obama administration's Pentagon decided to prosecute Clint for murder. And they told Clint's men that if they did not testify against their lieutenant, they would be charged with murder too. So they got a conviction. Clint was taken off to Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, like a dog, wearing black shorts and a gray shirt, put in a paddy wagon, driven from Fort Bragg all through Sanford, North Carolina, all the way to Leavenworth. And Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, remembered that. So in 2017, when the other two service members, Navy SEAL Gallagher and Major Goldstein, were now in the national news, Pete remembered Clint. And he came to me because we've been working together on Extortion 17 and other things. He said, "Don, if you will write a book on the Lawrence case, I'll make sure that you get as much national airtime on Fox as you need, and we will take this case through these interviews directly to President Trump to seek a pardon." I wrote the book. I could have made a lot more money off the book. I would take it to a major publisher, but I took it to a boutique publisher in Denver, publishes military books because it would get it out fast. We didn't know how long President Trump was going to be in office. The book was published in April of 2019. Pete kept his word. And by November of 2019, President Trump had seen our videos. He had been asking me through Pete for one-page memos on the case. On the night that he decided to effectuate the pardon, he asked me to draft the press release, which the White House incorporated when Clint was pardoned. And it was a glorious day. It's one of those things, to see Clint Lawrence come out of that prison and know that I've been privileged to work with the Secretary of Defense and the President to bring that about. That was an act of God thing, and I was blessed to be in the right place at the right time. So I've worked very close with the fellow who is now our Secretary of Defense, know him well. When the election steal of 2020 came along, based upon my work on the Lawrence case, I was recruited to be on three separate legal teams to fight the election steal. One team was headed by Sidney Powell, who some of you probably know. Sidney has endorsed our campaign, by the way, along, by the way, with Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, Delta Force Commander, who's endorsed our campaign, and the 24th National Security Advisor of the United States, General Mike Flynn, has endorsed our campaign. But I was working with Sidney, and on one team. Another team was actually headed by the former Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, Mark Martin, brilliant jurist. And a third team was headed by Sean Hannity's executive radio producer, Linda McLaughlin. So during this period of time, we were battling to stop the steal. And I can tell you, I've seen evidence that will blow your mind. And if anybody believes that Joe Biden got 80 million votes, as I say to folks, I've got some tropical land in the Aleutian Islands I'll sell you. It simply did not happen. I could come and talk in detail on the evidence that we actually found as part of those three legal teams trying to battle the steal. Now, the Lord knew what he was doing, and he knew that he wanted to bring President Trump back in 2024. But we learned a lot of lessons from that, some valuable lessons, that this can never happen again. After that, when COVID came along and the Democrats began their process of trying to shut things down, especially, COVID was used by the deep state to help steal the election. Then when the Democrats come in and start ordering businesses shut down, I never close my business, ordering folks to wear a mask. The only time you'll ever see me with a mask on if it's done by artificial intelligence, because nobody would ever, I never wore one of those things. And then there's the issue of the jabs and the vaxes. And I was speaking out against all this on social media, got into debates, in fact, got into a very public debate with Jerry Valancourt on Facebook. Jerry was the former voice of the Charlotte Hornets, very well known around the Charlotte area. He was on one side of the mask issue, I was on the other. He was on one side of the vax, I was on the other. But through some of this, when the Biden administration was trying to push these unconstitutional vax mandates for these experimental jabs, I got involved legally in fighting it. I was helping some folks with the EEOC who wanted to fight against the vaxes based upon religious exemption. And then we had 78 plaintiffs from the Savannah River nuclear plant down in Aiken, South Carolina. We make a lot of nuclear materials there. Well, the Biden Department of Energy went to the principal contractor there, Savannah River Nuclear Solutions, and Biden tells the contractor, either you force your employees to take the jab or we will cut off federal funds. Close to 100 came to me. We wound up representing 78. We filed a lawsuit, wound up in federal court in Columbia, South Carolina, first in front of Judge one of the three judges who Biden was selecting as his woman of color choice for Supreme Court, Michelle Childs. Michelle was not selected. Jackson Brown was selected. Michelle might have been better. And then the case, after Michelle ruled against us, we went to the Fourth Circuit in Richmond. Eventually, we were able to save all those jobs. But I want to share with you something that I share on the circuit that I think you should know. During the course of that litigation, we pulled the government's numbers in discovery. We pulled numbers from a system called VAERS, that is VAERS. Some of you may have heard of that. That's the government's voluntary adverse reaction reporting system for vaccines. Theirs was set up over 30 years ago. And over the time, if something ever looked odd about any vaccine, whether it's rubella or smallpox or hepatitis or whatever, if any little thing went wrong, the government would shut those vaccines down and shut down administration of those vaccines until they could figure out what would go wrong. I'm talking about if you had 3 or 4 shots reported gone bad, they shut the whole administration of those shots down. But I want you to think about this, though. From January of 2021 until October of 2021, based upon the government's own numbers, there were more deaths, DEATHS, reported from these COVID vaccines than from every vaccine combined over a 30-year period. In other words, these 3 experimental vaccines in a 10-month period, more deaths reported than from every other vaccine combined over 30 years. And your crooked criminal government never made you aware of that. And the crooked criminal propagandist media, which is basically an arm of the Democrat Party, never made you aware, and you had a right to know. And so I was very involved with that. And then along came January 6th. I was involved with January 6th as well. I've given legal advice to a number of our January 6th patriots, represented the young man, Elliot Bechet, who, as far as we know, is the youngest of our January 6th patriots. On the morning of March 18th, 2021, I got a call from Elliot Bechet's dad. The Bechets lived down in Fort Mill, South Carolina. Up until this point, the FBI had asked to talk to the kid twice, and I told him, no, you're not going to talk to him. All the kid did was go into the Capitol and walk out. On that morning, at 6 in the morning, I get a call from the dad, and the dad says, Don, I have 12 FBI counterterrorism agents raiding my office right now. 12. I said, okay, Hanny, his name is Hanny, I'm going to throw my suit on. I'm going to the federal courthouse in Columbia. The battle was going to be on whether the kid was incarcerated and taken into custody or not. That was the first battle we had to win. I get down there, go into the Matthew J. Perry federal courthouse right there by the South Carolina governor's mansion in Columbia. Walk in, find a U.S. attorney, and I say, what's up? He shows me the charge sheet. The kid is charged with 5 misdemeanors. And the U.S. attorney tells me and tells the judge the kid never attacked an officer, never broke anything, never did anything, except he was charged with the federal equivalent of trespass. And even some of the FBI counterterrorism agents were basically apologizing to me. They had to do what they had to do. But this is an example of the oppressive federal overreach. And I've been involved in these battles over the last 10 years. So going back to how do you select your senator, you got to look at track record. And I entered the race because at the time I felt like we needed a pro-Trump, MAGA, America First candidate in the race. And of course, Senator Tillis has now dropped out. But there's a larger question here, and that is this. Where do we go from here? What do I mean by that? We have because of the 22nd Amendment, the Trump administration is going to end by operation of constitutional law in January of 2029. The next senator serving in that spot will be serving under another president for 4 years. And there have been three flashpoint issues I want to briefly share before I close it that I've been discussing, we've actually seen out on the campaign trail. And one has to do with Doge and the national debt and the deep state. I kind of wrap all those together. You know, Elon Musk has kind of gone off the range a little bit as of recent, but he did some good when he was running Doge. And one thing Doge has shown us is that the deep state of the federal government is a criminal enterprise. I mean, we hear the ridiculous examples of how they spent money. They spent money, for condoms for Hezbollah. They spent money for Sesame Street in Saudi Arabia. I got nothing against Sesame Street, but the government shouldn't be paying for it, and certainly not Saudi Arabia. They're spending money for transgender phone apps in South America, all kinds of crazy stuff. This taxation monster that we have created has created a federal government with a federal bureaucracy that basically is a criminal enterprise. And against that backdrop, we're now facing a $37 trillion national debt. The national debt is a ticking time bomb that is rarely talked about. It's talked about, but I don't think most folks understand the threat that it is to us and the threat it is to our national security. And the point I make is that if you study world history, you know that every great civilization has controlled the world, from the Romans to the Dutch to the Spanish to the British to us. Everyone has had the dominant currency in the world. You read your Bible, you read about the Romans and the denarius. Everything is measured by denarius or denarii. When the Dutch came along, it was the gelding. When the Spanish came along, Christopher Columbus discovered America. During that period of Spanish domination, they had the Spanish had the peso. Then the British came along. They said the sun will never set on British soil. They had the pound sterling. The pound sterling fell to the dollar in 1944, Bretton Woods. In every instance where these currencies fell, they fell because of overspending. Now the dollar is sitting on the dollar, and the debt that we owe is a ticking time bomb. There are nations, the BRICS nations, that are trying to replace the dollar now. But we've got to curb and reverse the national debt, or one day it's like going to Vegas with 4 or 5 credit cards. You run them all up, and one day they're maxed out, and you can't even get a cab ride out of there. You can't get anything to eat, and everything is over. We got to reverse it. The only way to reverse this is to understand that the deep state must be dismantled. It must be dismantled. Let me elaborate on that a little bit. We know that President Trump coming in has taken out USAID through administrative order. He's, defunded basically the Department of Education through administrative order. But in those cases, Congress, which created those monstrosities, must end them. But any agency that is not specifically authorized by the U.S. Constitution needs to be eliminated. I'm proposing what I call a Deep State Reduction Act. What does that mean? Here's what it would mean, and I will advocate for this in the United States Senate. One, we would reduce the number of federal employees by 2/3 over a 10-year period. Right now, we got over 3 million employees. Get that down to less than 1 million over a 3-year period. These are non-military employees, number one. Number two, we reduce the number of agencies under the executive umbrella by 2/3 over a 10-year period. And every dime that is saved by the reduction of the federal government, and that would go to reducing the national debt. That's what we need to push. We have to understand that we lose our freedom by these agencies because they make all these regulations for every law passed by the Congress. In recent history, 10 regulations have been passed by these agencies. I remember when I was still in the Navy, Bill Clinton had come in at some point, and he wanted to, the EEOC under Clinton wanted to, if you're wearing a cross around your neck, they wanted to call that religious harassment. And Jesse Helms discovered that regulation, and he killed it. He eliminated it. The problem is they throw so many regulations on the wall that no member of the House or Senate can cover them all. So they get so much truth. If you take these agencies out, you can take the money and put it on the federal debt, reduce that debt, and you can reduce these regulations also that threaten our freedom. The second thing that's really hot on the campaign trail goes back to something I talked about just a moment ago, and that is the issue of medical freedom. The last time I saw and I hope I get to run against Roy Cooper because I'm going to stick it to them where the sun don't shine. Listen, the last time I saw my daddy alive was I was standing outside of a nursing home in Plymouth, North Carolina in 2020, standing outside on a frozen grass, looking in through a one-story brick building, waving at him from the inside, because Roy Cooper's unconstitutional mandates prevented North Carolinians from being able to be with their loved ones even in their dying days. And folks are furious about that, and also are furious about these vaccinations and what's going on. These mRNA vaccinations need to come to an end. Bobby Kennedy's working on that. We got to go farther. And it is not fair. We have great North Carolina corporations like Lowe's, Nucor Steel. I mean, you can go right down the list, and none of our North Carolina corporations are totally subjected from liability for what they do. So why is it that vaccination manufacturers should be given total protection? That's got to change. I think that we're going to have what I call, and I'll propose, a vaccination and a mask protection act by federal law, so that never again can the feds force us to take any vaccination against our will, and certainly not one that is under an emergency use authorization. Third thing I want to talk about, and I'll close, is taxes. Taxes. This is what's getting folks fired up, and for good reason. One of the things that Elon Musk did say, again, that made sense, is that when you look at these NGOs, these non-governmental organizations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Ford Foundation, whatever these foundations are, what they do is they say, hey, we've got this altruistic purpose. I want to save the whales. I want to save the children. I want to save, the spotted owl, whatever it might be. They never accomplish what their purpose is, but at the same time, they rake in tons of money. And because of what the tax system is, they don't have to pay any taxes. And they rake money in from other foundations who can do a write-off by giving. So it's a circular cesspool, whereas Democrat organizations are giving money to each other. If you heard President Trump's, or if you did not hear President Trump's 3-hour interview with Joe Rogan back in the fall, I would encourage you to do that. I watched the whole thing, and my respect for the man shot even farther off the roof than it had been before. Because for 3 hours, he goes toe-to-toe with Joe Rogan. He starts talking first about Civil War history, saying how Robert E. Lee was living inside of Lincoln's head because Lincoln could not defeat him until Lincoln found this drunk general out of Ohio. Finally, he could match Robert E. Lee. That's U.S. Grant. Then he starts talking about nuclear energy, and he talks about 90 rhubarb concrete like the French are using with their reactors. Who would have heard of 90 rhubarb concrete? It shows the grasp of the man's reading and intellect. Then he goes and he starts talking about tariffs. And Trump makes this point. He said that in the administration of William McKinley, we were making so much money off tariffs that we had to form a commission on what to do with the money. That's pretty amazing, and that's just off tariffs. Of course, people, including Senator Tillis, were complaining about Trump's tariff proposals, but look what the market's doing now. But here's what was not said in the interview, and I want you to think about this. From 1880 until 1913, in that period of time, when the United States made what I believe was our biggest constitutional mistake ever, with the passage of the 16th Amendment to authorize the imposition of income taxes. During that period of time, from 1880 to 1913, the United States underwent the greatest industrial explosion in history. And I want you to think about this. We did it with zero income tax. Zero income tax, if you can believe that. And the thing is that there was no corporate income tax either. I've been in all over the state. I've been in Cabarrus County. I've asked, where is our textile industry? I've been in High Point and Forsyth County. I've asked, where's our furniture industry? What happened to it? In my hometown of Plymouth, North Carolina, there was a large pulp and paper mill. Employed 3,500 employees when I lived there in high school, and now it's down to 300 and something, because the Clinton administration in the 1990s passed something called NAFTA, followed by most favored nation status to China. Why would you do that to your chief competitor? Followed by putting China in the World Trade Organization. And we basically flushed our jobs out the window. But think about this. If we were to eliminate the income tax, the personal income tax, and the corporate income tax, every one of those businesses that fled the United States because of overtaxation, overregulation, would return so fast it would make your head spin. So I am going to push A, for the elimination permanently of the Internal Revenue Service. It must come to an end. It is an oppressive organization. Like my friend Guy Smith said, the founders never meant for a situation to be put into place where American citizens are forced to have interaction with the federal government. The income tax system forces that. If you don't file your 1040 by April 15th, if you don't get an extension, they can prosecute you for willful failure to file. And if you file and if you make a mistake, or if you don't make a mistake and they claim you make a mistake, they can still prosecute you. That forced interaction should never take place. Therefore, the Internal Revenue Service must be ended. It must come to an end. And not only that, but the tax system that mandates income taxes altogether must come to an end. We can go to a fair tax like Governor Huckabee is recommending if we need to do that. But I would say first let's give tariffs a try. If you slim the government down to where it needs to be slimmed down, we can make this work. So those are the issues that are out there. I know I've spoken for a few minutes, and I am really looking forward, to getting there to be with you in person. I wish I was there today. I want to spend as much time with everyone as possible. I'm a constitutionalist. People say, are you conservative or what? I'll say, listen, I'm a constitutionalist. Constitutionalist, if you're a constitutionalist, conservatism flows from the Constitution. And the two overriding threads in the Constitution are one, limited government with most of the functions of the government set forth in Article 1, Section 8, and two, checks and balances to put a clamp or handcuffs on the overuse of federal power. We've got to get back to our original constitutional design. I'm a champion of the Constitution. I will fight for that with all my heart from the United States Senate. I know some of these positions I'm taking may be dangerous, trying to eliminate the Internal Revenue Service and to eliminate the tax system is going to bring a lot of flack, but I'm willing to do it for my kids, my grandkids, or my country. Love you all. Appreciate the work that you do. Thank you, Jane, for having me here by video for a few minutes. We look forward to getting to see you all in person. Sorry I can't be there today, but can't wait to see you. Have a great day and God bless.